Maybe you've heard people say that you can make the Bible say pretty much anything you want it to say. Well, there is some truth to that. If you take a passage of the Bible out of its context, you can pretty much twist it to say anything that you want it to say. If you're going to read and understand the Bible truly, you need to read it in context. You need to read it in its grammatical context, understanding that every passage has verses that come before and after it, and every book has a meaning. You need to read it in its literary context, understanding its genre. Is it poetry? Is it history? Is it apocalyptic literature? Is it something else? You need to read it in its historical context, recognizing that there's an author to each book, and there's an audience that it was intended for, and there's a historical, cultural situation going on in which that book was written. You need to read a passage in the light of the overarching biblical meta-narrative. What is the grand Bible story, and how does this passage fit in? And finally, you need to read it in the context of a life of spirit-led, obedient discipleship, reading not just to understand, but to obey and put it in practice. In some ways, what I'm talking about is basic reading comprehension skills. To accurately understand the Bible, you need to read it in its context. After all, you wouldn't take something like the Declaration of Independence or the Gettysburg Address and rip a verse or a line out of context and claim that it means something that doesn't line up with the intent of the authors. But we do that all the time with the Bible, often even in our devotional reading. We have devotional books that give us a verse out of context, and we take that as if it's a fortune cookie, and apply it to our lives without considering the context of what it really means. So what I want to do during this series is look at some of these passages that we tend to take out of context and put them back into their context and ask, what do these passages really mean? Have we understood them correctly? I want to begin today with one of my favorite verses, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Paul is writing to the church in Rome, and he says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." One more time. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. It's such a hopeful verse, especially when we go through difficult times like the one we're in now. But what does he mean when he says good? What is the good that he's promising here that God is working towards? Well, I think if you read one more verse, you get an idea of what that good is. In verse 29, he says, For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. What's the good according to verse 29? To conform us to the likeness of his Son, to make us like Jesus. Jesus, the one who suffered and was betrayed, rejected, died, crucified on the cross. That's the person that he's looking to conform us to. It doesn't quite line up with the good that is so often what our culture is telling us good is. Good meaning promotion and health and a life of comfort, basically. No, the good that he's talking about is to make us more like Jesus, to conform us to the image of his Son, to make us a person of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, to list the fruits of the Spirit from Galatians 5. That would be our character no matter what comes our way. You continue and you read through this context, it continues to say how if God is for us, who can be against us? And he goes on to end the chapter by saying nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. He's basically letting us know that God's on our side, always working for our good, no matter what comes our way, whether we're married, single, or divorced, whether the relationship turns around or not, whether the kids obey or not, whether the job or promotion comes our way or not. No matter what comes our way, we can trust that God is always working for our good to make us more like Jesus. That's the good that God is working for. It's not a superficial, worldly kind of good that depends on our bank account or our job status or relational status. No, it's a deeper good. He's working through everything to make us more like Jesus.